I personally think it's really hard to achieve optimal health without having really healthy relationships. And if you look into our world, everything is relationship. Our relationship with ourself, our relationship with partner, our relationship with our family or friends, our relationship with work, our relationship with our environment as a whole. I mean, everything is relationship, and that's the focus of this week's podcast, Alter Your Health. I'm your host, Dr. Benjamin Alter. This is your source of information and inspiration to promote the holistic transformation of your health and the health of our planet. I'm so excited to introduce you to our guest today. Her name is Rohini Ross, and she is my teacher. She is the founder of the Soul-Centered series, Psychology, Spirituality, and the Teachings of Sydney Banks, who is kind of the founder or the first person to articulate the three principles of mind, thought, and consciousness. And we're going to talk about how these principles influence relationships and how we can use our understanding of these principles to support healthy relationships. So if this is your first time tuning into this podcast, I just want to encourage you and ask you if you would subscribe, give a rating that's like a 5-star or a like or wherever you're tuning in from. And you can also provide a review, like a comment or a little bit of feedback if you're on iTunes or Stitcher or YouTube or wherever you're listening or watching. I'd so appreciate a comment or some feedback. And yeah, this is a great conversation. Like I said, I've known Rohini for a little while now. I see her every month at the Soul-Centered series in Santa Monica, and it's been such a fantastic program, and I've learned so much and appreciate her energy and perspective and teaching and understanding of these principles. So just to share a little bit more about Rohini before we dive into this podcast, Rohini Ross is passionate about helping people wake up to their potential. I really love that. I resonate with that mission. That's really my mission as well, on kind of the physical and mental emotional level, the holistic level, waking up into your potential. I mean, that's what health is. But she's a transformative coach and also a leadership consultant and an author of the ebook Marriage. I think she also wrote one called Relationships, which are both available on Amazon. I'll put a link in the show notes, alter.health/episode 80. Rohini has an international coaching and consulting practice based in Los Angeles, helping individuals, couples, and leaders embrace all of who they are so they can experience greater levels of well-being, resiliency, and success. And she is the founder of the Soul-Centered series, like I said, which is a program that explores the teachings of Sydney Banks from different teachers. And she co-facilitates couples intensives as well with her husband and business partner, Angus Ross. They work with couples who are struggling and couples who would simply like to deepen the love and intimacy they already have. So you can learn more about Rohini at rohiniross.com and also find her on Twitter or Instagram at Rohini Ross. That's ROHINIROSS. So before we dive into this wonderful conversation with our guest, Rohini Ross, I just wanted to tell you that this conversation is brought to you by Alter Health. That's my business that I co-own and operate with my beautiful wife, Dr. Susanna Alter, the co-host of this podcast. And Dr. Susanna and I work with individuals one-on-one as well. We support people in accessing and achieving health on all levels. And we also have a weekly group coaching program that we do every week. We have a Zoom call and we connect with you and we have a conversation about holistic health and healing, exploring topics of both mind and body, everything from these three principles to nutrition and lifestyle medicine. The conversations are rich and deep and meaningful. We're able to see your face and hear your voice and have, intimate connection in that way. So I'll stop blabbering now and we'll dive into this lovely conversation with our guest, Rohini Ross. Okay, Rohini, welcome to the Alter Your Health podcast.
Thank you. Great to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. So, I know you, but people that are listening probably don't know you, or some may know you. But would you like to just introduce yourself and kind of share who you are, what you do, and what your background is in the world of what it is that you do?
Okay. It's always funny with this question. It's like, how far back do I start?
Yeah, where were
But
you born?
well, currently I work as a transformative coach, and I have a specialization in relationships. I also work with companies doing leadership consulting and intensives with individuals as well. And really, the focus of my work is to help people to connect with their true nature, their natural state of potential that is innate in every single one of them. And I help them do that through them having a better understanding of how their mind works and what really gets in the way of them being able to access what is their innate talents and their innate potential. And so, my background, I'm trained as a therapist. I'm actually licensed as a psychotherapist, but I also have a coaching certification. And the basis of the work that I do is based on the understanding called the three principles that was shared by Sydney Banks and has been known by various different names over the years. But it's really a spiritual understanding that um, is very simple, but it's very profound in the depth of being able to see how our relationship with our own thoughts can get in the way of being able to access that innate well-being that lies inside of us.
Beautiful. Well, some people are familiar with the three principles, of course, who are listening. And I know, I've been sharing the principles in my work with clients and in our group coaching program. And I guess I would say that you are kind of the first person to bring it into my awareness fully, even though it's kind of been peripherally shown to me through Susanna and through my mom. But I feel like you're one of my original teachers. And how is it that you got into the three principles?
Yeah, so that that was a great journey because I wasn't looking to sort of have a different philosophical understanding impact my life in this way. So, what was going on in my life at the time is I was working. I was a therapist, but I was also on the leadership team of a behavioral health company. And it happened very quickly that I ended up being on the leadership team. There were some changes within the organization that had people just step away. And I think they were expecting the company to kind of fold at that point. But there were, the founder and another clinician and myself really believed in the work that we were doing. And so we decided, like, we'll take this on. Not only will we, support the service side of the work, but we'll run the company. And so I found myself really getting in over my head, and it just was a lot. And I was feeling overwhelmed. I was feeling burnt out. And I was also realizing, like, oh, it seems like there's things that I don't know. So I started to look at how can I continue my education so that I could be better equipped to do what I'm doing. And so one of the things that I started looking at was coaching, because I thought that that would help with my own life, but also with what I was doing. And so I took a coaching certification program that was recommended to me. And one of the weekends in that program was taught by George and Linda Pransky, who are my two mentors. And they were sharing from this understanding of the principles. And the way that they were sharing was very different. I heard it very differently than what anyone else had been sharing. They were speaking to potential in a way that I hadn't heard before. And I didn't really, it didn't click what they were saying. I didn't really sort of have this, aha, oh, this is it. But I felt better, and I knew that they were pointing in a direction that I wanted to learn more about. And so that's really what started my journey. And I, studied with various people over the next few years, and then I did an intensive with Linda Pransky. And I would say that's the point where I really saw something that helped me to um, recognize the impact that this can have and how it's different than other things out there. And so in that intensive, what happened was I went there and I wanted to have less anxiety in my life, less insecurity in my life, because of the role that I was in. I was doing a lot of public speaking, and I enjoyed the idea of it, but I didn't enjoy the experience of it. I loved sharing what I was sharing, but I did not enjoy the nerves that I would have beforehand. I did not enjoy the shame that I felt afterwards, because I always felt that it was never good enough. And so I could see that there was something that was wanting to be expressed, but I was getting in my way, and it was creating a lot of suffering. And so I went there really wanting to have less suffering, wanting to have less insecurity. And I thought that I was going to be, given a way to not have insecurity in my life. And I thought that that was what I was looking for. I thought that was going to be the freedom, that the freedom was going to come from feeling better. And so I was very attached. I didn't realize at the time, but I see now how attached I was to feeling good. So anytime I didn't feel good, it looked like it was a problem. And because it looked like it was a problem, I tried to fix it. And when I tried to fix it, it tended to blow it up, and I would feel worse. And I wouldn't really see it working that way, but it's how it was working. And so during this intensive, and very quickly, very simply, early on in the intensive, that's what I got to see, was that I had a reaction to my human emotional experience. And it wasn't my human emotional experience that was the problem. It was my reaction to it that was creating more suffering. And so I might have an experience of insecurity, but the way that I would relate to that experience is what then magnified it and amplified it. And what I was trying to do was basically erase my humanness. Like, I wanted to erase certain emotions from my human experience, and we don't get to do that as human beings. But in the process of trying to get rid of them, I was amplifying by focusing on them, by trying to change them, by seeing myself as having something wrong with me because I had them. And that's what was creating the suffering. And so the freedom that I got in that intensive was recognizing that the freedom didn't come from feeling better. The freedom came from having less fear about my human experience, less fear of certain emotions that I was scared of, and that then I would be able to have the ups and downs of my human emotional experience, but without the inner reactivity to that. And that space was the freedom. Whereas I thought the freedom was going to come from being in a good feeling longer and more of the time, that was getting me more caught up. And what had me feel such expansion inside was seeing that wherever I was at in the human emotional continuum, I was okay. Like, I just dropped into an experience of being okay no matter what I felt. And that was the real freedom, and that was the real gift. And I had spent, my career looking at things from a psychological perspective, thinking that my job was to change the experience. My job was to change my experience, but to help other people change their psychology, rather than simply have a different understanding of their psychology so that they could experience their well-being innately.
Wow, that's such a beautiful story, and just the way that you share it and the energy and place that you share it from really encapsulates the principles for me, having, my understanding. And, backing up just a little bit for people who have totally no awareness or comprehension of what these principles are, how do you like to show people who don't know what they are?
Yeah.
Like, what's the most basic itty bitty glance at
Yeah.
this perspective? Yeah.
I'll give it my best shot, because
Yeah.
it's like anything that is pointing towards truth. It's hard to put into words. But what
Hmm.
I would say is the principles is it's a label, and they're terms that are used to point towards truth, which really can't be put into words. So Sydney Banks was the first person to talk about the principles as mind, consciousness, and thought, and that those three principles are what work together to create our human experience. And so if we look at them individually, the principle of mind is really just pointing to the fact that there's this innate intelligence behind life that drives life. It's that life force that is in everything. And it is intelligent. We see it, in the human body and its capacity to heal. We see it in nature and its capacity to grow and thrive in different environments. And there's this innate intelligence and life force that is within everything in the universe. And that would be pointing to the principle of mind. And we feel it. So it's like these concepts are intellectual concepts, but they're pointing to something that we all feel and know inside of ourselves. And then the principle of consciousness is the capacity that we all have to witness our thoughts, and to have an experience that comes from thought. And so it's neutral. But as humans, we all have this capacity of consciousness that allows us to live in this world. If we didn't have consciousness, we wouldn't have an experience. And then the third principle is thought, which is, as humans, we have the gift of being able to come from this formless energy, but have the form of thought come to mind. And then that gives us a personal experience of being human. So when those three come together, the life force, consciousness, and thought, we get to have this experience of being alive in this world of form. And we get to play with form. We get to live in this world and express in this world. But that isn't the full picture. There's this formless essence of who we are that fuels all of that. And the principles are not the only way of pointing towards truth. I want to be really clear about that. They're a way that I really find simple and effective. And so that's why I use that. But there's an infinite number of ways to point toward truth. And ultimately, we each have to recognize it within ourselves. It's not going to come from somebody else telling us something. It's always going to come from what we listen to and hear from inside. And that's how these principles are used, is to point people towards their capacity to experience truth within themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's so important to understand how this is just one way of seeing and looking and explaining things. And there's so many ways to point at and look at and describe the truth. And I love it's just so amazing to know that there's no words ever do it justice. There's nothing that we could say or do or show that would ever really adequately reveal the magnitude and beauty of truth, but we're doing our best. And I mean, one thing that I really love about the principles is just how simple and non-complicated it is. It's just there. And you talked earlier about how when you were first kind of introduced with Linda Pransky, it was different. There was something different, and you heard something differently. You saw something differently. Could you just kind of elaborate a little bit more on how that was a different experience for you based on your history of, being a therapist and understanding psychology from other perspectives? How was that feeling different?
So what was really different, like a 180 different, not like an incremental different, but like a complete opposite different, was I had thought that I had to work on improving myself, and that there was effort required to get better and improve my personality, improve the quality of my thinking, improve the quality of my emotional experience. I thought that required work. And I was putting a lot of work into that. And what I saw when I really saw what the principles are pointing to, what she was pointing to, is that she was pointing to this innate well-being, this innate peace of mind that exists without any effort. And that the only thing that gets in the way of us experiencing that peace, that well-being, that feeling of love, all of these qualities that I would say are associated with our true nature, the only thing that gets in the way of that is when we identify and get caught up in thoughts that are different than that. And so I saw the simplicity of that, and I saw the innocence of what I had been doing was trying to use thought to get to that place of well-being. Like I thought I had to work on my thinking to get to peace of mind. I had to do something to get into a good feeling. And all that that was doing was getting more and more thoughts. And with the more thoughts, the further and further away I was getting from the well-being that was innately there. So I hadn't seen before the truth that at our essence, we are whole, we are complete, and that nothing is needed. I might have agreed with that intellectually, but my behavior was not in accordance with that, because if I had really seen that, I would not have been working on myself the way that I had been working on myself. I would not have been trying to improve myself, all with good intentions, but all in a way that was reinforcing an idea that I was broken and needed to be fixed.
Hmm.
And that I could fix myself with some technique, some self-management, some, thought management system that would, turn bad thoughts into good thoughts, stop thoughts that were bad thoughts. Like, it was just so much work on the psychological level. And when I let that go, I dropped into the experience of well-being. And that's when my eyes, like, oh my goodness, this has been here all along, and I've just been looking in the wrong direction. And so now I see that when I'm getting stirred up, or if I'm working with someone who's getting stirred up, the only thing that they're up against is their own thinking in the moment. In terms of their inner experience, that piece is available to all of us. But it's like one of those things where if we try to get there, we don't get there, we get further away. So a metaphor I'll use is water. Like, if you have choppy water in front of you and you try to smooth it over with your hands, it doesn't smooth the water over, it gets more choppy. But
Yeah.
if you leave that water alone and let it settle, it's going to get calm, because that's what happens naturally with water. Well, I saw, like, oh, if I leave my thinking alone, if I let my mind relax, it will go to quiet. It is designed to move towards quiet. I hadn't seen that before. And when it moves toward quiet, the feelings of well-being and the depth of the peace, like, that's right there. There's nothing to do. There's no way to make that greater than what it is. It is infinite. We can't add to that, and we can't improve on that. And when we try to, we're working with our psychology, and that's always going to be all over the place. That's the nature of thought. It's always going to be all over the place. That's part of the design. It's meant to be fluid. It's meant to be changeable. We're going to have good thoughts, bad thoughts, ugly thoughts. Like, that's just the nature of thought. And we don't need to fight it or change it or work against the principle of it. When we understand it for what it is, we get more discerning about which thoughts we pay attention to, which thoughts we let go. And we also get a real respect for a quiet mind that is the natural state, and see the value of living life more from that place.
Yeah. I love that. I really love the water example. I don't know if I've heard that before, or at least it didn't click before. It just is makes so much sense. You're trying to spread out the water, but it's just making more waves. And I really do understand that there's like this universal principle of the more we try to do something, the further away it gets. And it's like that. And I think it's a Buddhist philosophy as well, this, kind of attachment thing. The more we're attached to our outcomes, the further away our outcomes are. And then there's just this cycle. So I think the principles really kind of, it speaks to that, or points in that direction of just like letting things go, which of course, it starts as an intellectual process of like, I need to step back. But the experience is, like you emphasize, is the peace of mind. And I feel like once we have that, then we can use that as kind of our reference point and remembrance of how good it feels to just like not be wrapped up in stuff. But
Absolutely.
yeah.
And I was also going to say that what the principles help me with is to see why attachment gets in the way of the outcome. Like, it helped me to understand, like, oh, attachment is thought. Attachment is me getting compelled by thought and looking in the direction of that, and stirring it up. And that's why I get further away from peace. So it really helped me to see more clearly how it works in terms of when I'm moving away from peace of mind, how I'm relating to my thinking in a way that is what's creating that. And seeing that is what allows us to have more free will and choice. And we naturally, it's not like we have to use our willpower to not get in our own way. When we see we're getting in our own way, we naturally are going to stop doing it. It's just, common sense at that point.
Mm, mm. So I would love to shift into the realm of relationship and talk about how these principles can support relationships. And I know that they can. And obviously, I think that it starts with the relationship that we have with ourselves and our own mind and our own thoughts. But how do you kind of weave this understanding to support couples? Because I know one thing that you do is couples intensives with your husband. And so how
Mhm.
does this kind of come into your practice or
Yeah.
approach?
It's it was one of those things, like I said, when I went to that intensive, I was looking to have less insecurity, which happened. Um, but there was a huge impact on my relationship with my husband Angus, that I wasn't like, I thought we had a good relationship. I wasn't expecting anything, to really shift. And it got so much better. And so what I saw was that I hadn't been recognizing how I still held Angus responsible for my own inner experience. So, with the understanding of the principles, it's really clear that what we experience is our own thought in the moment. So, I might have been seeing that intellectually in the realm of relationships, but when this sank more deeply to an experiential level within me, what I saw was that he really didn't have the capacity to make me feel a certain way. And how that played out was, one of the areas where I, in the past, tended to be very sensitive in our relationship is that I would be very critical of his irritability or anger or anything in that realm. I would judge it, and it would be, wrong in my mind. And I would judge it because I would be feeling badly. Like, I would take it personally. And so in that dynamic, it looked to me like his irritability or his anger was the cause of my internal suffering. Like, it just looked like that happens, and then I feel this way. And so then what happened after that intensive, I came home, and there was just one of those, normal married couple moments where he was annoyed about something, getting irritable. And I felt complete peace in that moment. And I genuinely saw that he was suffering. Like, I saw that his upset was a reflection of him being in a stirred up mind and his suffering in the moment. And I just did not take it personally. And that was a complete game changer for us. Like, it was one of those defining moments in the relationship. He was shocked because he was doing his thing, and I wasn't taking the bait because I could just see that he was suffering and that there was nothing for me to do. And other than I had compassion for him. Whereas in the past, I would have been critical, I would have been condescending, I would have been arrogant, I would have said something back, and it would have escalated, likely. So it just showed me, like, oh, I'm always feeling my own thoughts. And when I'm in a clear mind and seeing things clearly, I can see that his behavior has nothing to do with me and is not responsible for how I feel. And that when he's not at his best, it's simply a reflection of him being in a stirred up mind. Doesn't mean anything about me, doesn't mean anything about the relationship. And that learning, it's a learning. Like, it was a powerful moment in that moment, but it's kind of like it's a deepening, and sometimes I forget, sometimes I don't see it, and then I get reminded again. But was a complete game changer in terms of the conflict in our relationship. Because when it always takes two people to get into that kind of conflict, and when one person isn't engaging in that way, it just kind of fizzles out. And what Angus said to me was that when I was compassionate in the face of his upset, it was like I was holding a mirror up to him. And I wasn't doing that, but his experience was that he was having a mirror held up to himself, and he could kind of see that he was behaving badly, and his natural conscience kicked in, and he kind of just settled down. And so it's not like I'm condoning bad behavior, but I'm recognizing that, the innate state of every single human being is peace. It is love. It is well-being. And so the only reason that people behave badly is when they're suffering and they're not connected with who they really are.
Yeah, I think as you were sharing, something was coming to my mind about like when someone's in an upset, then um, it's the other's responsibility to kind of be compassionate and just see that that person is in their own separate reality and allow them the space to have their process. That's kind of one thing that I heard you saying. And I feel like sometimes I experience a fine line between, compassionately respecting and understanding someone's process, and also like, you know, just slightly judging it, like that's your problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like that, like you're silly for getting upset about this. Like, what's your problem? So it's just like this, fine line on the inside of like how I'm feeling in response to another person's upset. Um, so do you ever experience that, or do you know what I'm talking about?
I absolutely know what you're talking about. And I'm
Yeah.
human, so I can totally relate. But what you're pointing to is really important, because you're pointing to a difference in state of mind. You're pointing to where that person is really coming from inside of themselves. And so if I'm in that's your problem, I'm not in a compassionate place.
Yeah,
You
that's
either
not
are or you're not.
compassion.
And it could be degrees of not. So it might be only a slight degree of not, but you're still not.
Yeah.
And that's a reflection of that person's state of mind. They're stirred up. So if let's say it's Angus, he's stirred up, and if I'm like, oh, that's your problem, then I'm to some degree stirred up.
Mhm.
And that would be very different than me being completely neutral, having an open heart and saying, oh, he's suffering. And so if I'm stirred up and he's stirred up, then what we've learned is, take responsibility for ourselves. And the best thing to do is wait to address anything until neither one of us is stirred up, because it's
Mhm.
like adding gasoline to the fire when you try and
Mhm.
communicate from that place. And it's really important that especially when you're dealing with someone, if they're in an experience of upset, sometimes we don't realize that we're stirred up because it's kind of minimal, but they're going to feel it. Like that other person is going to know the difference between someone who's genuinely compassionate and someone's like, yeah, that's your problem. They're going to feel it, and it's not going to go well. So it's just kind of getting good at being honest with yourself and realizing like what is really neutral. When
Mhm.
we're working with couples, oftentimes what we'll see is that what they think is neutral is actually nowhere near neutral. And they think, well, I'm approaching this in a neutral way. And what they're really saying is like, I'm acting logical, even though I'm feeling upset. That's
Mhm.
not neutral.
Mhm. So sometimes I feel compassionate on the inside and on the outside in terms of my actions. Like I don't know what to do. It's
Mm.
like I feel compassionate and like, okay, Susanna gets upset. Everyone knows Susanna. And yes, she does get upset. Like she's a human too. And when that happens, I'll feel compassion, but I still sometimes am like, don't know what my action should be in the physical world reality. Should I give her a hug? Should I walk out of the room? Do you think that there is a proper action to be taken in conflict in relationship, or
I don't, I think it's really going to be dependent on the individual in the moment, because there's just too many variables. I don't think there's a one size fits all, but it's okay not to know.
Mhm.
And it's okay if you're genuinely coming from a compassionate place, I would imagine that it would be okay to ask the question, would you like a hug? Would it be better if I left? Like, it's possible to kind of check that out. And let's say, the person in front of you is, really, really upset, and anything you say is going to set them off, then you'll be like, oh, probably better to leave now. Or, you'll get your own sort of feel for what makes sense in the moment based on what their response is. But I think it's not knowing is a really honest and good place to be. We don't always know. And it's
Mhm.
fine to be in the not knowing. And if we have some ideas and we're just not sure, you can just check them out.
Mhm. And you also talked about kind of, well, you said a couple of things. You said you're either compassionate or you're not, which I kind of understand. But you also, I think, mentioned something about kind of levels of compassion. So you're compassionate or you're
Well,
not, but
actually,
then,
I actually said
or,
levels of not being compassionate. There
oh,
could
okay.
be a little not compassionate or a lot not compassionate.
Yeah, that makes more sense because I
Yeah.
was like, because sometimes I feel like maybe there are levels of compassion also where it's like, wow, I don't that, but that's just more of a feeling state in any moment.
Yeah.
But that makes more sense. So it's you're compassionate or you're not. There's
Yeah.
no
I mean,
middle.
that's how I see it. And maybe there's difference, like you're saying, in intensity of the compassionate experience, but it's really it's important to know whether you're compassionate, open-hearted, neutral, or not, because
Mhm.
it can be a slippery slope where we kind of kid ourselves into, yeah, I'm compassionate, but we're not really there, and things don't go well when we don't
Yeah.
recognize that.
Yeah, one thing that I have always really appreciated, I feel like now that I've, learned from other teachers of the principles, I can kind of evaluate, a little bit from this person, that person. One thing that I really appreciate about your sharing is it's like everything is so okay.
Mm.
Every ounce of the human experience is so okay. And if only we all knew that deeply, then we would be in such a more peaceful world. And so it's hard. Sometimes it's still hard for me to understand how being disrespectful and uncompassionate and all that kind of energy can be okay. Can you speak a little bit to how these sort of nasty human tendencies or nasty human tendencies that are so human, can you speak
Mm-hmm.
to how it's okay and how to relate to our, I don't know, our
Yeah.
shadow or whatever
Mm-hmm.
you want to
Mm-hmm.
call it? Yeah.
So I want to make a distinction between condoning behavior and accepting the human experience. And I'm not going to judge behavior, but I want to be clear, I'm not condoning bad behavior for the sake of bad
Mhm.
behavior. But what I recognize is that the bad behavior that we demonstrate as human beings, myself included, is always going to be a reflection of suffering in the moment. And every single human being does the best they can with the understanding they have in the moment. Every single person. So behavior is a reflection of understanding. And so behavior is always going to be a reflection of somebody doing the best they can in that moment, even if 2 seconds later their understanding shifts and they're like, oh my God, I can't believe I did that. So it's in terms of being okay with the human experience. And this has been such a huge learning for me, and continues to be a learning for me. But what I experience now is like so much freedom in seeing that the human emotional experience, the full range of it, is all normal and healthy. Like there's not an emotion that is an unhealthy emotion. There's not a feeling that is an unhealthy feeling. And being okay with that, what I find is that there's much less of the negative behavior the more that I'm in acceptance of what my human experience is. And I find that with other people too. The more that people have space inside for the full range of their human emotional experience, there's less fear of it. They see the transitory nature of it. They see that it shifts and changes, and that even if we get into a really negative place, dark place, angry place, that it's going to change, then there's much less need to act out from that place, because the only reason we do that is because we're trying to feel better. If somebody's feeling the pressure of their anger and they don't realize that that anger is going to move through them, that it's just stirred up thinking, that they're going to settle, they're not going to feel that way, 5 minutes from now or 20 minutes from now, then there's much less reactivity that is going to come from that experience, because the people that act out from that place, it's the way that they're releasing the pressure. It's their wisdom's best attempt to feel better in the moment. And so they release the pressure, and maybe they lash out verbally, maybe they lash out physically, but I'm not condoning the lashing out part. But I do understand when that happens, where it's coming from, and it's that person's best attempt to take care of themselves in the moment with the pain that they're feeling inside. But when they understand more about how their experience is created, where it comes from, how the nature of thought works, then there's going to be much less desire to act out in that way, because nobody feels good after they do that. Like, I think we can all relate to that. I know that when I have harsh words with Angus or one of my daughters, I never feel good afterwards. It always feels terrible. And so I would never do that if I saw in the moment that there was a better way. And I only do that when I'm really lost in the moment, and that pressure inside is clouding my perceptions, and I'm releasing it without even realizing that that's what I'm doing.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, thank you. That really clarifies the, condoning versus accepting,
Mm-hmm.
which I
Yeah.
think is important for people to
Yeah.
really understand and grasp that, you know, the goal is acceptance.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'm curious about any communication tools or strategies, or or ways of navigating. You kind of spoke to it a little bit earlier when you, for example, when two of you are in upset and conflict, you've understood that it's best to kind of turn and address things later, which is, honestly contradictory to what I've always felt. A lot of the time I always felt like, something's up, I've got to really address it, it's in my face, and it's for me. And I've had this belief and understanding that, these conflicts are opportunities to like get over things. But can you speak to a little bit of your kind of strategy or way of approaching communication in conflict, when like in the
Mm-hmm.
heat of it?
Mm-hmm.
Like, do you always kind of retreat? And I trust that you follow your wisdom and guidance in the moment, but is there any things to know about compassionate communication in and
Well,
around conflict? Yeah.
yeah, I mean, absolutely. And so, one of the things that I think is foundational is understanding what happens when our minds get stirred up and when we get emotional. So what happens is that our view of life shrinks down. It gets narrower. And when our mind is relaxed and peaceful, our perspective opens up and we have a broader picture. And even from a brain functioning level, when the emotional part of the brain activity goes up, the cognitive functioning of the brain goes down. So it, from that place, to me, it's just common sense to not try to work things out from a upset place, because my perspective is going to be limited, my cognitive functioning is going to be lower, it's not going to get the best results. And if you've got two people in that state, it's probably just going to get worse. So that's the common sense as to why I don't think it's a good idea to try and work things out from that place. And I've seen it enough times where once, I've settled and Angus has settled, or with clients, once they've settled, what looked like a problem from a really stirred up, escalated place either looks very different, or it may not even be a problem. It might even be a non-issue at times. So it's amazing how differently the world looks and how situations look from a narrow, contracted point of view versus an open mind, relaxed, open-hearted state of being. And so that's kind of the learning. Now, am I perfect at that? No, I'm not perfect at that. And Angus is probably way better at this than I am, because sometimes I'm like, I won't let it go. So it's like, that's humanness, and that's my learning curve. But I do know inside of myself that even though I'm not always able to achieve it because I get too compelled, that it works much better in my favor when I don't. And I'm really fortunate that Angus is much better than I am. And so he tends to not engage with me. So even when I'm ready to go, he'll be like, no, I'm not going to. So, and that's a learning curve. And it's like recognizing that the feelings that we have, the thoughts that create them can be so compelling, and they can look so real in the moment. And because it looks so real, we want to act on it because it's like, I need to handle this now, and whatever. But the truth is that urgency is a reflection of state of mind. And it's a reflection of a stirred up state of mind that's not seeing the big picture and that is distorted. And the more I trust that, the worse the results are. The less I trust my thoughts when I'm in that state of mind, the better the results are, and the more graceful my life is, and the easier my relationship is.
Yeah. It seems like, what's coming to me is just how relationships and really all, I've kind of felt that all aspects of life is just relationships, our relationship with work, our relationship with school, our relationship with whatever. It's all relationship. And every relationship is kind of what's coming to me. It's kind of like a experiment where things are just shifting and morphing and evolving. And there's no way of approaching things. There's just an understanding of how the dynamics work between two things, and
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. And the more we understand how our experience is created, you basically, relationship is one person creating their experience, another person creating their experience, and then those two experiences coming together. So if you have two people who are in a really beautiful state of mind, the experience they create together is going to reflect that. If you have two people who are having an experience that's really upset or angry, and you bring those two people together, well, then you're going to get an experience that reflects that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really, what I love about this is the simplicity of seeing, like, oh, it's only really about understanding um, where we're coming from in the moment and making choices based on that understanding. So if I know what my state of mind is and it's stirred up, then whatever I'm thinking is a problem out here in life, what I'm seeing, I'm going to be more suspect of what I'm seeing. And I'm going to wait and see how things look when I'm in a better state of mind, and see
Mm-hmm.
then what needs to be addressed. And then at that point, it's usually maybe something practical or logistical. And that's usually very straightforward to figure out.
Yeah. What's also coming to me now is, people can have heated debates and conflicts and fights, and there can be a pattern. And sometimes, I'm sure you would agree that sometimes it's best for these two people are like not compatible, right? Like what do you have to think or say about like two people kind of, not like throwing in the towel and giving up on
Yeah.
a relationship, but just being guided by their wisdom that like this isn't working.
Well, yeah, I think that, and you can have people that actually enjoy that, like they like high conflict, and that's something
Yeah.
that they enjoy, and that's great. As long as that's something that they're like, I love getting in a good debate and having a good, argument. It's like, great, that's fine. But what I would say, if there's a couple that is having high conflict and they're not wanting to have high conflict, what I would say is that the more, at least one of, sometimes it doesn't even require both of them to see this, but if at least one of them could see that their behavior that is engaging in the conflict is a result of their own stirred up mind and their own experience, their feelings that are coming from that, and that they saw the problem was not their partner, that the challenge was coming from their mind being in a stirred up state and their thoughts being stirred up, and that they could see that their peace of mind was available to them independent of how their partner is, independent of their partner changing, that they could have more peace and well-being because it comes from the inside. Like once they see that, then they could decide whether or not they want to be with their partner.
Yeah.
They might be like, okay, this is great, no problem. Or it might be, you know what, I do want to move on, this isn't my preference. But
Yeah.
for me, what's most important is the self-empowerment piece of understanding that we really are the creators of our experience, And it doesn't mean that we control our thoughts. It doesn't mean that we have to manage our thoughts, but how we relate to our thoughts is what creates our experience. And that's within us. Nobody can take that away from us. And nobody else is responsible for that.
Yeah. I mean, that is so empowering and so true. And I think it, it obviously comes back to like the Viktor Frankl story and
Yeah.
how, the circumstances that he was in and the freedom that he felt and experienced. And, there's still a piece of me that's like, well, there can be some really crappy, abusive patterns and tendencies. And I'm sure that choosing out of that, based on, wisdom and inspiration, and
Mhm.
not running away and pointing fingers and blaming,
Yeah,
but, being empowered to just choose, like you were saying, choose your experience and
absolutely.
choose your destiny.
Yeah, when we see that we have access to that peace and wisdom inside of ourselves, independent of our circumstance or the person that we're with, and we connect with that, if we're in a dangerous situation or a situation that is unhealthy for us, our wisdom will guide us. It will show us the way towards our own health and well-being. And oftentimes, people that stay in very difficult, abusive situations is they're not accessing their knowing. They're not able to really um, hear that, and they're caught up in their old story and narratives about themselves, about life, that don't have them listen to that deeper knowing of what's truly in their best interest.
Mhm. And yet, what I really hear you saying is, they're not aware of that and not connected with that, but it's there and accessible regardless of what the outer circumstances are,
Yeah.
and how abusive and dark and scary and loud, there's always the quiet peace of mind that is attainable, and I think, it is, I know, intellectually, I know that it is just one thought away, the peace of mind. And, I'm curious to know your thoughts on this as well. I feel like in the same way, it's also kind of like a muscle, and like we can strengthen our connection to our peace of mind,
Well,
but
yeah.
and it's one thought away. But the more that we connect with it, maybe like the more we're able to access it and connect with it regularly. What are, what do you
Yeah, I
think?
would say that you could look at it as a learning curve. I would say how I see it is that peace of mind is who we really are. Like, that's the truth of who we are. And it just is. So there's nothing to be done with that. But what the learning curve is that we get better as human beings in not distracting ourselves from the experience of that. And we get better at seeing how we get compelled by thought and go on these, journeys of our own imagination that can be of a negative nature that take us away from that experience of who we are.
Yeah.
And the more that we see that, and I think it's an never ending learning curve. I think that there's always more to see around this, but the more that we see that, the less we use our gift of thought against ourselves, the more we get to experience our true nature. And the more we use thought in ways that are productive and useful because we need it to navigate life. It's wonderful to come up with ideas and be able to write things, to do your podcast. Like, we need thought. It's very useful. It's creative. It's a beautiful gift that allows us to live and experience life in really amazing ways. The only challenge is when we use it against ourselves. And when we use it against ourselves, we don't realize we are the ones using it against ourselves. And so we can use the gift of imagination to, imagine beautiful things, writing wonderful books, doing, um, you know, wonderful projects in the world with that gift, or we can use it to beat ourselves up and tell us that we're not good enough, and go into negative stories in that way. And then we're going to have the experience of that, not the experience of who we really are.
Mm. Yeah, thank you so much for reiterating and emphasizing that the peace of mind is our essence. It is that the calm water. And it can seem like that's what we're striving for. It can seem like that's what the goal in life is, to accomplish and achieve and obtain that. But it is underneath all the crazy thoughts. Yeah. And I think, that just always sinks in, and in a deeper level each time I have conversations and am reminded of that truth. And I think that, I think we can all kind of comprehend it on an intellectual level, and giving ourselves opportunities to feel it and recognize it and acknowledge it and be with it, I think more and more is just so important.
Yeah, and that experience of peace, it's in a sense it can be paradoxical, because the freedom of mind that I experienced, from that intensive, and that I experience, more now than I used to, is the freedom of mind of being okay with whatever the emotional experience is. And so it's not an attachment to being in a good feeling or even being in peace of mind. Like, the freedom includes all of the emotions. Like, the peace of mind includes all of the human experience. So it's not like part of the spectrum of the human emotional experience. It is all of that. And feeling it's kind of like, sometimes people talk about as deeper feelings, to kind of make that distinction between sort of the emotional range of happiness and then these deeper feelings. But I don't really know of another way to distinguish it, other than I feel it is an inner freedom that is fine with whatever my emotional experience is. And I'm not saying I feel that all the time, but I see that that's different than attaining a certain emotional experience, which is what I was trying to do before, because I thought that was how I could have a good life.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, are there any favorite resources or books or videos or things that you really love to point people towards when it comes to relationships specifically? And
Yes, there are. Well, I have a couple of ebooks on
yeah.
relationships. One is Marriage, that's on Amazon, and one is Relationships, that's on my website. And then also the other book that I highly recommend to people on relationships is The Relationship Handbook by George Pransky, and that's available on Amazon too. And then I have a weekly newsletter that goes out that always has a relationship vlog in it with Angus and
Oh,
myself. And
yeah. I
we
thought you were
really,
going to say the weekly vlog, which, was coming to
yeah,
mind. But
yeah,
yeah, go ahead.
yeah. No, that's it. That's the weekly
Yeah.
vlog that goes in my newsletter with my blog
Yeah.
posts. The weekly vlog goes in there too, which is just a really lighthearted way of looking at relationships, but also informative too.
Yeah. I've tuned in a couple times, and I really appreciate it. I- is what's the intention or goal or hope of that kind of short little vlog snippet that you do each week?
Well, the thinking behind it was that we wanted to really normalize relationships and the kind of the kooky stuff that goes on in relationships. So we just sort of talk about the things that go on in our relationship and see the humor in it, but also use our personal experience as a way to um, point people towards how they can have greater peace of mind and ease in their relationships. So they're educational, but they're also humorous, and they're very short, so that they're easy to take in, but very lighthearted. Because I think so often when people are having a hard time in relationships, they get really serious about it and they get really
Mm.
worried about it, and that is automatically going to get them more closed-minded and more restricted, and not have them see what the possibilities and potential is that's really available to them.
Mhm. Yeah, what I'm just recalled of, I've been listening to this audiobook, and it was talking about humans kind of really obsessing about romanticism and about all these kind of, exotic vacations and dinners and wines and just kind of like really all these experiences that we crave. But what's coming to me is just how the mundane can be romantic,
Mhm.
and I think that's kind of what you're showing and demonstrating is like you don't need to go anywhere or do
Yeah.
anything or buy any special bottle of wine to really appreciate the sacred connection. And
Yeah.
in fact, as we strive for it, if we're looking out there for the romantic fulfillment, it's never to be found. It's
Yeah.
unobtainable because it's endless limits of how far we can travel and drink and eat and grasp.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
And really, and I'm all for enjoying life and enjoying the pleasures of life, but really, that intimacy, connection, and love comes from dropping into who we really are. That is our natural state.
Mhm.
And when we experience that natural state and share it in a relationship, it's really beautiful. And you're
Mhm.
right, it doesn't need anything other than the people showing up.
Yeah, and sometimes, in fact, all the things outside might even like distract, maybe,
Potentially, yeah. Yeah.
potentially.
Yeah.
Um, well, anyways, yeah, thank you so much for such a lovely conversation. And it's always enlightening for me personally to get new insights and glimpses into my relationships and my world. I'm sure listeners have had similar experiences. And for more on Rohini Ross, I know your website is rohiniross.com and you're on Instagram and Twitter at Rohini Ross, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you. And peace and love. And until next time.
Thank you so much.